I would begin by congratulating Steve and CIS for what I would consider a rather extraordinarily even-handed piece of research on a problem that has arguably not gotten as much attention as it might because it deals with sensitive topics. Um, as someone who spent a fair piece of my career in Washington at various think tanks, including Brookings and the American Enterprise Institute, I'm certainly familiar with the problems of policy research and advocacy research, and certainly mindful that in recent years, those two different kinds of research have more and more overlapped, and regrettably watch that trend. And certainly today we're in an era where it's hard to read anything in academic journals, journals of opinion, and certainly in newspapers, where purported experts and specialists obviously indulge their biases and their predilections. It's become endemic in all parts of the political spectrum. So when I read something from an advocacy organization that's clearly been preoccupied for a long time with reducing overall levels of immigration, and read a report like this that one picks up and points to a problem that has been neglected and that is potentially politically loaded, and then does it in an extraordinarily even-handed and fair-minded way, looking at possible alternative explanations, and being very careful to and precise about what it's arguing, what it does know, and what it does purport to find out, and what it does not purport to find out. I am struck very, very, very strongly and positively. So I congratulate Steve and his colleagues at the Center for Immigration Studies. And I think he made that clear, his perspective, not only in his report, but his remarks right now, just preceding mine. Now, what I would turn to is to point out some of the implications of what Steve and his colleague have reported on, and to emphasize and to draw attention to the fact that they have primarily looked at the long-term implications and the long-term policy implications, especially of their findings. And not surprisingly, given CIS's long involvement in immigration policy discussions and debates, and being concerned with the impacts, the unacknowledged, unrecognized, or ignored impacts of historically high levels of immigration into the United States. Among the first implications that Steve and his colleague point to is, of course, the possibility, indeed the desirability from their point of view, I think it's fair to say, to limit overall immigration levels. But that's not the only thing they suggest, as Steve just got through mentioning, and I'm eager to underscore. He and his colleague also talk about the possibility of raising minimum wage levels, or earned income tax credits and other such redistributive schemes that have proved relatively popular and relatively successful, or a much more controversial notion and topic, promoting unionization among workers, including immigrant workers. And I think that's worthy of note. That's a full array of possibilities and policy options that CIS is urging its readers to consider in response to this particular problem. What I would add, though, and I think perhaps this particular study and its proposal is less specific on and perhaps neglects a bit, um, are the more short-term implications of the immigrant-related overcrowding and its impact on COVID-19 that it draws our attention to. By short-term implications, I would, first of all, and here they do mention this and they stress it, that immigrants should not be culpable in this regard. They should not be stigmatized. They should not be deemed guilty of committing or doing anything. This report, this study, recognizes that this is a complicated social and economic phenomenon that is one of the outcomes of our prevailing immigration policy. But there's not a hint here of immigrants being stigmatized or the notion that they ought to be stigmatized or blamed for these uh, complicated structural and indeed to some extent cultural problems, as the report also points out. Um, in that spirit, one might also talk about, although the report does not specifically mention this, uh, the need for special outreach programs to immigrant communities. That certainly would be one short-term implication of the findings of this study. Um, there are others, obviously, but it's that dimension, that aspect of our current situation that I think the authors might have spent a bit more time focusing on. But I think that's a relatively mild criticism in the broader context of the care and the thoroughness with which these two investigators have explored this problem. Um, Especially, as I said at the beginning of my remarks, at a time when these issues are so charged and our environment is so charged. Um, there's again, this is a remarkable piece of research on a very difficult public policy problem. Not just the fact that it's COVID-19, which itself is obviously rather controversial, but the connection between immigrants and the spread of COVID-19 is, I dare say, a topic that has been avoided in most contexts because it is so charged. So once again, I congratulate and express my admiration for the even-handedness and the discipline of these two researchers who have produced what I consider an important and enlightening and positive contribution to an important public policy issue.